went to work for Boeing in 1980 in their video production group because they had a lot of high-end gear for video production that I knew meant they were serious about what they were doing. And I wanted to work for a company that did good work. And at that time, of course, it was McDonnell Douglas. I wish I could tell you that it was because I loved aircraft from the beginning, but I really didn't. It was all about the video production. When I first came into McDonnell Douglas in 1980, as you walked along the end of Building 2, one of the very first things you saw were 3 F-18 aircraft that were sitting there being put together. And then after that were miles and miles of other fighter aircraft, or it seemed like that. You could look as far as you could see and see nothing but aircraft production. And we're talking the big pieces of the airplane, so it looked like an airplane at that point. There were 15s and Aviates. We were hopping in the early 80s. So I got to work with all of those because I was video production. I was not tied to any one thing. And they were all unique in their own way. The Aviates for the Marines at that time were just hugely powerful. And it was nothing to come into work in the morning and see them out on the pad doing push-ups with the Aviates where they were testing. Or to leave in the afternoon and see an F-15 Viking out of Lambert Field in St. Louis was one of the few places you could do that even then. So the aircraft were all around me, literally all around me every day. And they became a thing of delight for me. The original F-15 Bitchin Betty, which was a lady named Kim Crow, it was recorded probably in the 70s, and the quality of the recordings had changed so much from the 70s to the early 90s that was the difference. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with Kim's voice or Kim's calls or anything like that. It was simply the recording qualities had changed so much that when they put my new calls against her old calls, the discrepancy between the two was very stark. We had every call out of the F-15, so the audio engineer simply pulled all of those together on that cassette tape that went in the car, so I could ride around with her voice and her, more importantly, not her voice, but her diction and her intonation on the words, because that was the way it was supposed to be. They had done such an extremely fine job on that there was no reason for me to try to change that or do anything differently. And I could tell from the sound of her voice that she was a professionally trained voice actor. So that was something I wanted it to be like. So I simply rode around with it, and it was like my old French classes in high school. Listen and repeat, listen and repeat. It was a little scary, to tell you the truth, because I'm not a voice actor. I didn't think I should be particularly doing this, but everybody seemed pretty intent on it. I was on staff, so I was convenient to them. They did not have to pay me anything extra. If they wanted something different, they could come back to me with no issues or problems of that. And if somebody else got in with me, I just didn't turn it on. And if I did turn it on, or if it came on automatically, they just got a chuckle out of it. I liked, people are surprised, they're hesitant to call the voice Bitchin Betty if they're not within the community. But it's been that way for so long that's just right. It's like the sky is blue. That's just the way it is. Bitchin Betty is the voice of the airplane. And that really doesn't change no matter what your airplane is. I know the Brits call theirs Nagging Nora, and somebody else has Barking Bob. And I'm sure even the commercial planes that they have where they mix voices, male and female, I'm sure they have references to them as well. I'm not sure it's affection so much as it is just an acknowledgement of what is. I can't even think of anything else to nickname the voice. That's just the way it is. The biggest challenge we had in recreating the audio warnings, the biggest challenge is one I've already kind of addressed earlier, was my accent. The technology that we used to do it was very normal to us. It was simply a digital recording that was at a high-end sample. It was cleaned up. It was nip-tucked to make it as short as possible. Because they have storage space issues on that voice box in the airplane, so they want to keep it as tight as possible. There really was no challenge in that. The only challenge that any of us felt like was something to be overcome was my accent. As you can tell from listening to this, I grew up in Georgia and Tennessee. I very much have a southern drawl, and I've lived in St. Louis now for 35 years, so this is as cleaned up as my accent is going to get. Having been around professional voice actors a lot, some of it I can do simply with projection, but that's why I rode around with the tape in the car for 2 weeks, trying to emulate the original Betty. The gentleman that I met who felt like the voice calls had saved his life had a huge impact on me in the sense that it was one of those moments that just stops you cold in your tracks and puts it all in perspective. Having been around the aircraft as long as I have, all of us have our impact on it, and you watch the people who build it and the pride they take in their work and the care they take in their work, engineering and how they do the design work and how they can argue about what they're doing and why they're doing it and how best to do it. All of that is a huge piece of craftsmanship. I mean, those airplanes are so beautifully crafted. And that's all of the fighter jets that I've ever been around. I mean, they are big, complicated, system type machines that are just kind of amazing. To be around the air crews that fly those airplanes, and I've been fortunate to be around several of them, is always amazing because I know how fast they fly, I know how many G's they pull. They do difficult work, and they rely on what McDonnell Douglas and Boeing build to do that work. But that becomes a part of the day-to-day. And I got a telephone call from a friend of mine over in another area who had aircrew in working that week, and one of the gentlemen had asked, somehow it had come up in conversation that they knew Bitchin Betty, and he asked if I was available. He'd like to talk to me. And Katie called me and asked me to come over, and I did. And this gentleman, with no fanfare or no fuss, said he had really wanted to meet me because he had been doing night training out over the Sea of Japan. And I got the impression that they had been doing it for quite a while, and he had gotten down pretty low to the water. I think low on the deck's the way they would phrase it. And he suddenly got the call to roll right, which is part of the ground avoidance system. And the ground avoidance system was the reason I got involved in the first place. It was the reason, it was a relatively new system that was put in the plane, and there were no calls for that at that time. So he got the call to roll right, and the ground avoidance stuff is do it now type of things. So that call is sharp and demanding, and there's no questioning it. And he didn't. He rolled right immediately, and he said if he had not done that, he would have crashed that night, that he would have died. He was just certain of it. It was a heart-stopping moment for me. I am pretty glib with people and enjoy people a lot. I'm very much an extrovert. I was speechless. I could barely fumble my way through the rest of the conversation. I was so stunned by that. And although you know it on an intellectual basis, to know someone, to talk to someone who could say that to you in all sincerity was just stunning. Absolutely stunning. It's one of those things I will remember forever. It was amazing. You're the only one that has asked about other projects that I worked on. I had a wonderful career with the company. I got to do a lot of things very early on when there were not a lot of women around doing that sort of stuff. Being in video production, I got to go places and do things. We started out, when I first came into the company, there were huge contracts for maintenance videos being made on the 15s and the 18s both. And that was how to do this and how to do that. So it was servicing nose wheel landing gear. It was installing the pyrotechnics that would blow the canopies and things like that. I once spent about 3 days crammed into the back of an F-18 cockpit with the gentleman who was rigging the canopy. And the reason I got there with the camera was because I was physically the smallest one of the crew and would fit in the space better, least miserable. I was also kind of low man on the totem pole, so that helped too. But I got to climb all over those aircraft in my early days with the company, and things were a lot less rigid then. So if we needed to do something, we figured out a way to do it. There was no one standing there to say, oh, you can't do that, that's not safe, or you can't do that because it's against this rule. There was a lot less of that. So with the mechanics we worked with out on the line and the video crew, it became a nice rapport to get what we needed to do the job. And that was a lot of fun. That was the early days. And then as time went on, I liked doing new things. So as new technology came along, I tended to go into that new technology first. Like when we started using satellite uplinks and we started doing a lot of live event work for rollouts. I went through the merger from McDonnell Douglas to Boeing, and I was heavily involved in that. So there's been different centennials, different anniversaries, big public events that were a lot of fun. I can remember videotaping a radar class on the FA-18 for, I am not kidding you, 3 weeks solid of an instructor standing up teaching a class. That was one of the most mind-numbing things I've ever did. But I had a great time. I had a wonderful experience of jobs and a range of work with the company. It's very strange to be part of the history. You never, I don't think many of us think about that at the time. I certainly didn't. Boeing, McDonnell Douglas is a big company with lots and lots of people. Our history is long. These aircraft are an accumulation of those disciplines and that knowledge base. Pieces are built on pieces again. So it is such a community effort that I don't think too many individuals would ever go into it and think about it being part of their history or them part of its history. We are simply part of the whole. It's great to have a piece of history of this aircraft, with any luck, I think with the age of this aircraft and the stage of its development, I would be surprised if the voice is ever redone completely again. I suspect I will be in this aircraft as long as this aircraft flies. And that's a wonderful thing to have as part of my personal history, to be part of that beautiful plane, to serve our country in that small way, to be a piece of that aircrew environment from now on is just amazing to me. It's amazing to me. And we all look back at this stage of our lives to where we've come from. And I have the wonderful thing of looking at where I came from in that small town in Tennessee and going, who'd ever thought I'd do that?